What if a single word spoken in Arabic by a black waitress could shatter the arrogant facade of a billionaire family and reveal generations of hidden secrets? When Amara served the table of laughing rich patrons mocking her accent, she never imagined that her response would make the powerful father go deathly pale, recognizing something in her that no one else could see. The son who laughed would soon learn that some debts transcend money and some connections run deeper than blood. What if the distance between serving champagne to billionaires and feeding medicine to an aging grandmother could be measured in subway stops and worlds apart? Amara Johnson flexed her aching feet inside sensible black shoes that pinched her toes after 12 hours of gliding across the polished marble floors of the Crystal Swan, where Manhattan elites consumed meals that cost more than her weekly groceries. The weight of exhaustion pulled at her shoulders as she balanced a tray of crystal flutes, each one worth more than the textbooks waiting unread beside her nursing school bed. Light fractured through massive chandeliers overhead, catching in the pristine white tablecloths and reflecting off silver, so polished she could see the fatigue etched into her own face whenever she leaned over to serve. The scent of truffle oil and reduction sauces clung to her uniform, following her later on the cramped subway ride back to Harlem, where different smells awaited her tiny two-bedroom apartment with its persistent hint of her grandmother Naima meds and the lavender sachets the old woman insisted on placing in every drawer. Amara had perfected the art of the serene smile, a mask worn through countless encounters with patrons who addressed the space beside her ear, who snapped fingers for attention, who commented on her slight accent as though she were a curious specimen rather than the woman who ensured their water never emptied and their bread remained warm. The manager had pulled her aside twice already tonight, reminding her that Mrs. Vandermeer at table 7 preferred her napkin folded precisely when she stepped away, and that the gentleman at table 12 had complained his wine was 2 degrees too warm, accusations that came with pointed glances at her dark skin, suggesting the temperature problem somehow originated there. Behind her pleasant nod lived calculations of tip percentages and overtime hours, budget columns aligned in her mind like soldiers preparing for battle against rent increases and the rising cost of the medications that kept her grandmother breathing comfortably through the night. The Crystal Swan floated upon Central Park South like a glittering bubble, its windows overlooking treetops and distant limestone buildings, where many of their clients lived lives of careless abundance, while Amara counted subway tokens and grocery coupons with the same precision she used to distribute silverware. Yet despite the weight of it all, she moved with a grace that suggested royalty rather than servitude, her spine straight and her eyes clear and direct when addressing even the rudest patrons. There lived in her something unbroken and unbreakable visible in the gentle firmness with which she handled difficult customers, in the perfect recall she demonstrated when reciting specials without notes, in the way she spoke 4 languages with flawless pronunciation, though none of the customers knew or cared. Nursing textbooks filled her locker in the back room, anatomical drawings and pharmaceutical notations crammed into the margins of her order pad where she studied between courses, determination driving her forward through double shifts and missed sleep, through casual indignities and the particular exhaustion that came from being simultaneously invisible and scrutinized. Friends, before we go further, may I ask a small favor? Please subscribe to our channel. It truly helps us keep bringing you these stories, and reaching 1,000 subscribers soon is so important for us to continue. We also love hearing from you. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. It's always fascinating to see how our little storytelling circle is spreading across the world. And if you enjoyed the beginning, give this video a like and let's share thoughts on the whole story together below. The evening air inside the Crystal Swan changed like weather before a storm when 6 young men in tailored Brioni suits swept through the entrance without waiting for the hostess to acknowledge them. Conversations hushed and silverware stilled against fine china as heads turned to watch Karim Al-Fayeed lead his entourage across the dining room, his clone leaving a trail of sandalwood and privilege in his wake. The restaurant staff exchanged knowing glances, veteran servers subtly shifting backward while newer ones were nudged forward, no one wanting to be assigned to the notorious table of demanding patrons known for their impossible standards and insulting tips. Karim raised one manicured hand adorned with a gold signet ring bearing the Al-Fayeed family crest, casually dismissing the stammering hostess who attempted to explain that the corner table overlooking Central Park required reservations weeks in advance. His companions laughed too loudly for the refined space, their voices carrying mentions of nightclubs and models waiting for their after-dinner appearance as they pulled out chairs at the already occupied table they wanted, standing over the current diners until the embarrassed couple gathered their belongings and retreated. Light from the chandeliers caught on gold watches and diamond cufflinks as the young men settled into their stolen territory, draping cashmere jackets across chair backs and placing the latest smartphones beside water glasses like additional place settings of technology and wealth. The restaurant manager appeared instantly, bowing slightly as he welcomed the son of Faisal Al-Fayeed, Arabic oil billionaire whose investments had reshaped Manhattan skylines and whose name adorned hospital wings and university buildings across the city. Karim barely acknowledged the manager while demanding their finest champagne be brought immediately, not bothering to check the wine list or inquire about the price, his sense of ownership extending beyond the table to encompass the entire restaurant, as if his family might acquire this establishment too if service displeased him in any way. Other patrons watched with mixed expressions of recognition, annoyance, and the particular fascination reserved for extremely wealthy individuals whose public behavior confirmed they lived by different rules. Behind the service station, servers huddled in urgent whispers recounting previous encounters with the Al-Fayeed heir, who had once sent back a steak 7 times before declaring the entire menu inedible, who left phone numbers instead of cash for pretty waitresses, who spoke multiple languages but used them primarily to ensure staff from various backgrounds understood his insults. The restaurant seemed to reshape itself around the gravitational pull of inherited billions, staff moving faster, smiling broader, the kitchen preparing special items not offered on the menu, all while Karim remained oblivious to the small indignities accumulating around him like invisible dust. Amara watched from across the dining room as she cleared another table, noting how Karim casually flicked water onto the floor when he found a smudge on his glass, how he spoke without looking at the sommelier presenting a bottle for his approval, how his friends elbowed each other and lowered their voices when an attractive woman walked past their table, their shared laughter carrying something predatory beneath its privileged surface. The universe of fine dining shrunk to the circumference of a single table as Amara approached the Al-Fayeed party with professional poise, leather-bound menus balanced in her steely hands while her heart hammered an anxious rhythm against her ribs. Silverware clinked against bone china at neighbouring tables, and soft classical music drifted through hidden speakers, but these ambient sounds seemed to dim beneath the loud laughter of 6 privileged young men who continued their private conversation without acknowledging her presence for nearly 3 full minutes. When Karim finally deigned to glance in her direction, his eyes moved across her face without seeing her, as if she existed merely as an extension of the restaurant furnishings, functional but unworthy of genuine notice. The ordering process unfolded like an exercise in creative degradation, each young man requesting complex modifications to already intricate dishes, interrupting her recitation of specials with dismissive waves, one asking if certain ingredients were truly organic while texting without looking up. Sweat gathered along her hairline as Amara maintained her professional smile, the practiced curve of her lips growing stiffer with each casual disregard for her humanity, each snickering exchange in Arabic that they assumed she could not understand but whose insulting tone required no translation. The breaking point arrived with harmless words that carried lethal intent when Karim finally addressed her directly, asking about wine recommendations with a theatrical widening of his eyes. His friends quieted in anticipation as Amara began describing a particular vintage that would complement their selections, her slight southern accent emerging, as it sometimes did when she grew nervous under scrutiny, a subtle music of stretched vowels and softened consonants inherited from her grandmother. Karim interrupted her mid-sentence, leaning back in his chair with exaggerated posture as he mimicked her pronunciation with grotesque exaggeration, transforming her professional recommendation into minstrel show entertainment for his companions. Their laughter erupted like breaking glass, sharp and dangerous, and impossible to unhear, bouncing off the restaurant walls and seeming to draw every eye in the establishment toward the spectacle of her humiliation. Heat rushed up her neck and bloomed across her cheeks, while ice simultaneously formed in her stomach, creating a physical paradox of burning shame and cold rage that rendered her momentarily speechless. The elegant dining room with its soaring ceilings suddenly felt claustrophobic, oxygen thin as if at high altitude, the distance between tables collapsing until she stood exposed in a spotlight of derision with nowhere to retreat. Years of customer service training battled against the primal urge to defend her dignity, propriety wrestling with righteous anger as she stood perfectly still, order pad clutched in fingers that had gone numb, aware that every possible response carried consequences she could ill afford. This moment crystallized everything unfair about her existence, every boundary crossed because people like Karim viewed her humanity as optional, her dignity as negotiable, her worth determined by her usefulness, rather than her inherent value as a person deserving basic respect. Time bent around Faisal Al-Fayeed as he entered the Crystal Swan without announcement or fanfare, his presence registering first as a shift in atmospheric pressure before visual confirmation arrived in the form of a distinguished man with silver-threaded black hair and impeccable posture. The restaurant seemed to inhale collectively and hold its breath as the billionaire patriarch moved across the floor with the measured confidence of someone who had never needed to rush toward or away from anything in his 70 years of existence. Unlike his son, who demanded attention through volume and ostentation, the elder Al-Fayeed commanded notice through its opposite, a magnetic quietude that drew eyes naturally in his direction as conversations faltered mid-sentence throughout the dining room. Chandelier light, caught differently on his charcoal suit, expertly tailored yet understated compared to his son's flashier attire, the only visible wealth displayed in a simple platinum watch and the subtle red silk lining glimpsed when he removed his cashmere overcoat. The group of young men scrambled to their feet as he approached, their previous laughter evaporating like morning dew in harsh sunlight. Karim suddenly transforming from domineering leader to uncertain subordinate beneath his father's level gaze. Something ancient and unreadable lived behind Faisal Al-Fayeed eyes as they flicked briefly toward his son before settling on Amara, who stood frozen with order, pad still in hand, caught between relief at the interruption and new anxiety at facing the family patriarch. Restaurant staff materialized instantly around the table, the manager himself appearing to pull out the chair at the head position, sommelier hovering with reserve wines, busboys adjusting table settings with nervous precision, while Faisal acknowledged none of it, his attention remaining fixed on Amara with an intensity that felt almost archaeological, as if he were excavating something hidden beneath the surface of her features. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the textured depth of fine bourbon, smooth yet complex, addressing her by name though she had not yet introduced herself, asking about her well-being with such seemingly genuine interest that confusion replaced her lingering humiliation. His companions and son watched with poorly concealed shock as the billionaire requested Amara personal recommendations rather than deferring to the executive chef who hovered nearby, listening attentively as she described a simple fish preparation, nodding with approval at her knowledge of proper wine pairings. The dining room recalibrated itself around this unexpected dynamic, ambient light seeming to gather more densely around their exchange while dimming elsewhere, creating a momentary bubble of significance that excluded even his son despite the crowded table. Something stirred in the depths of Faisal's weathered face when Amara's distinct cadence emerged in her speech, a flicker of recognition quickly mastered, but not before she caught its reflection, their eyes meeting. Briefly, in a moment that contained questions without shape and answers without context, the first whispered notes of a melody neither could yet identify but both somehow recognized as significant. The choreography of fine dining required precision, as Amara balanced 5 ornate plates along her arm and approached the Al-Fayeed table with practiced grace, her earlier humiliation temporarily masked behind professional composure. Steam carried complex aromas of saffron and cardamom from the specially prepared dishes not listed on any menu, created specifically to please the influential family whose reputation preceded them in every establishment across Manhattan. Conversations and silverware clinked in the background as she carefully positioned each artfully arranged plate before its recipient, describing ingredients with reverent attention to detail while Faisal listened with unexpected interest, his attention still unnervingly focused on her face rather than the culinary masterpiece before him. The temporary peace shattered when she reached Karim, who smirked at his companions before loudly questioning whether someone with such a backwoods accent could possibly pronounce the French and Arabic fusion elements correctly, his voice pitched to carry beyond their table as he suggested perhaps she should stick to describing simpler American fare like hamburgers and hot dogs. Laughter rippled through his sycophantic friends, while Faisal's expression darkened almost imperceptibly, a storm gathering behind carefully controlled features though he remained silent, watching his son with eyes that had grown suddenly cold. Heat flashed through Amara's body as memories cascaded through her consciousness like tumbling dominoes. Childhood afternoons spent with her grandmother, reciting ancient poetry in languages few Americans recognized. Nights studying linguistics alongside her medical textbooks. The weight of cultural heritage her grandmother insisted must never be forgotten, regardless of economic circumstance. Something shifted inside Amara in that crystallizing moment, a tectonic movement of self-respect realigning her internal landscape as she straightened her spine and turned deliberately away from the son to face the father directly. The single word that emerged from her lips carried the perfect pronunciation of classical Arabic in its most formal register, a word chosen with devastating precision that referenced an ancient code of honor among Bedouin tribes concerning the treatment of those who serve with dignity. The syllables hung in the air like suspended crystal, perfectly formed and impossible to unhear, creating ripples of silence that spread outward until the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath in collective shock. Recognition blazed across Faisal's weathered features as the color drained from his face, leaving him ashen beneath his olive complexion, his hand frozen midway to his water glass while his eyes widened with something beyond surprise that bordered on reverent fear. Karim's confidence evaporated instantly as he registered his father's reaction, confusion replacing arrogance as he looked between Amara and Faisal, suddenly uncertain about the invisible current flowing between them that had nothing to do with status or wealth, but something older and more fundamental. The weight of unspoken history pressed down upon the table with such force that wine trembled in glasses, and the very air seemed to vibrate with potential energy. The universe of possibilities expanding and contracting simultaneously around a moment that would irreversibly alter the trajectory of lives previously separated by vast chasms of privilege and circumstance. Time slowed to a glacial, cruel as the ancient Arabic word hung suspended in the rarefied air between them, every ambient sound in the restaurant fading to distant murmurs, while Faisal Al-Fayeed stared at Amara with eyes that had witnessed the impossible. Colour drained from his face in visible waves, olive complexion fading to ashen grey as his fingers trembled against the stem of his crystal wineglass, sending concentric ripples across the burgundy liquid that caught and fractured the overhead lighting. The composed billionaire who controlled global markets and influenced world leaders now struggled to maintain his legendary composure, his breathing shallow and uneven as he placed both palms flat against the white tablecloth to steady himself, wedding ring clicking softly against fine china. Without taking his eyes from Amara's face, he addressed his son and companions in rapid Arabic, his tone brooking no argument despite its uncharacteristic unsteadiness, dismissing them with the abrupt finality of someone accustomed to instant obedience. Confusion and resentment flashed across Karim's features as he glanced between his father and the waitress, this unprecedented disruption to hierarchical certainty visibly destabilizing his understanding of the world. Yet he complied without verbal protest, gathering his friends with sharp gestures and pointed glares that promised future consequences. The sound of chair legs scraping against marble flooring punctuated their reluctant departure, while restaurant patrons watched the unexpected drama unfold with poorly disguised interest, sensing the seismic shift occurring, though unable to comprehend its significance. Faisal gestured toward the now empty chair beside him, his hand still trembling slightly as he invited Amara to say, the request delivered with a curious mixture of command and supplication that acknowledged both his habitual authority and newly discovered vulnerability. Restaurant staff froze in collective shock at this breach of fundamental social boundaries, the manager taking an abortive step forward before halting under Faisal's piercing side glance, the hierarchy of wealth trumping hospitality protocols. The weight of 100 unasked questions pressed down upon the table as Amara hesitated, order pads still clutched in suddenly damp fingers, her professional training battling against curiosity that pulled her toward this unexpected moment where invisible barriers between server and served had suddenly dissolved. When she finally lowered herself onto the edge of the vacated chair, the subtle shift in perspective from standing service position to seated equal created a visual manifestation of transformed power dynamics, her eye level now matching cross-imported tableware that suddenly seemed like arbitrary props in a theatre production whose script had been abruptly rewritten. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic patterns across the tablecloth between them as Faisal leaned forward, his composure partially recovered, though something fundamental had altered in his bearing. the controlled confidence of billions, replaced by an almost reverential uncertainty as he studied her features with the focused intensity of someone searching for confirmation of a truth both hoped for and feared. The ambient sounds of the Crystal Swan receded like an outgoing tide as Faisal leaned forward across fine china and crystal, his voice lowered to a register meant only for Amara, asking questions that transformed the elegant restaurant into merely a backdrop for excavations of memory and history. His fingers traced absent patterns on the white tablecloth as he inquired about her family with unsettling specificity, each question building upon her answers with the precision of someone following a map toward buried treasure. When Amara mentioned her grandmother who had raised her, something electric passed across his weathered features, his next words emerging with carefully controlled casualness that failed to mask their underlying urgency as he asked the name that seemed to already live on the edge of his tongue. The word Naima fell between them like a stone into still water, creating ripples of visible reaction across Faisal's composed exterior, his breathing momentarily suspended before resuming at a quicker pace. Other diners and servers moved about the restaurant in blurred peripheral shapes as their conversation constructed a bubble of privacy through sheer intensity of focus, the present moment thinning until past memories pressed against it with almost physical force. Faisal questioned her about her grandmother, with the focused attention of an archaeologist uncovering a long-sought artifact, wanting to know about Naima's accent, her education, the stories she told, whether she ever mentioned Cairo University or spoke of ancient manuscripts with particular reverence. Each answer Amara provided seemed to confirm something both hoped for and feared in Faisal's expression, his eyes growing brighter with unshed emotion, even as his shoulders gradually released decades of invisible tension. When she described the small collection of Arabic poetry volumes her grandmother kept wrapped in silk, despite their threadbare bindings, books apparently worthless yet treated as priceless, Faisal's fingers trembled against his untouched water glass as he asked about specific titles, with a voice nearly unrecognizable in its vulnerable hope. The weight of unspoken history pressed between them with increasing density, Amara sensing that her simple answers about family history somehow carried significance far beyond casual curiosity, each detail she provided fitting into a puzzle whose complete image remained just beyond her vision. Restaurant staff hovered uncertainly at a distance, unwilling to interrupt whatever transpired between the billionaire and waitress, the executive chef emerging briefly from the kitchen to assess the unprecedented situation before retreating with confused glances towards the manager. When Amara mentioned the small golden scarab pendant her grandmother always wore, yet refused to sell even during their most financially desperate times, Faisal's eyes closed briefly in what appeared to be physical pain, his hand moving unconsciously toward his chest where something unseen seemed to rest beneath expensive fabric. The invisible architecture of connection between them solidified with each exchange, transforming the random chance of their meeting into something that resembled destiny rather than coincidence, history revealing itself not as static past, but as dynamic force still shaping present reality through bloodlines and buried secrets and promises made decades earlier under different stars. The delicate ecosystem of the Crystal Swan ruptured with the appearance of Mr. Phillips, the restaurant manager whose perpetual smile had calcified into a mask of professional outrage as he materialized beside their table with hands clasped so tightly his knuckles shone white against his dark suit. His voice maintained a veneer of hushed civility, entirely contradicted by the cold fury in his eyes as he informed Amara that her services were no longer required at the establishment, effective immediately, her breach of protocol by sitting with a guest representing an unforgivable transgression against the invisible boundaries separating those who served from those who were served. The manager's body language performed an elaborate dance of deference toward Faisal, while simultaneously radiating contempt toward Amara, his practiced smile never reaching eyes that had already calculated the benefits of demonstrating authority over staff while appeasing wealthy patrons. Crystal glasses clinked nervously throughout the dining room as conversations hushed, other servers freezing in place with trays suspended as they witnessed the public execution of a career, the scent of expensive perfume and rare wines mingling with the sharper aroma of fear that accompanied unexpected disruption to rigid hierarchies. Colour drained from Amara's face as the full implications registered, unemployment representing not merely inconvenience but potential catastrophe given her grandmother, medical bills and tuition payments, her hands trembling slightly against the pristine tablecloth as she began to rise from the forbidden chair. The atmospheric pressure within the restaurant shifted with the subtle straightening of Faisal Al-Fayeed's spine, his expression transforming from private vulnerability back into the mask of a man who controlled empires, with the casual ease of someone who had never encountered a problem money could not solve. His voice emerged low, yet carrying impossible authority as he informed Mr. Phillips that his behaviour suggested the Crystal Swan might benefit from new ownership and management, perhaps beginning negotiations that very evening, unless more immediate concerns indicated a different path forward. The implied threat hung in the air like fine. Crystal suspended a moment before shattering, the manager suddenly trapped between competing fears as he visibly calculated which powerful entity presented greater danger to his continued employment and social standing. Restaurant patrons openly stared now, wealthy diners recognizing the unmistakable sound of power colliding with power, the elegant dining room transforming into a battlefield where the weapons consisted of influence rather than steel, yet remained equally capable of drawing blood. Beads of sweat materialized along Mr. Phillips' hairline as he retreated into elaborate apologies directed toward both Faisal and Amara, his earlier certainty crumbling beneath the superior force of billions, principles of proper restaurant protocol suddenly flexible when confronted with someone wealthy enough to rewrite them. Faisal watched the manager retreat with the detached interest of someone observing an insect, his attention returning to Amara with renewed focus, while other staff members suddenly discovered urgent tasks requiring their presence elsewhere, leaving their conversation island temporarily protected by the force field of extreme wealth and this demonstrated willingness to deploy it against those who interrupted matters, deemed important by the architect of financial empires whose influence extended far beyond mere restaurants regardless of their Michelin stars or exclusive clientele. Raindrops attacked the floor-to-ceiling windows of Karim Al-Fayeed penthouse like liquid bullets, mirroring the storm of humiliation and rage churning inside him as he paced across Italian marble floors that had cost more than most Manhattan apartments. The panoramic view of Central Park and glittering city lights beyond normally soothed his ego with visual confirmation of his elevated status. But tonight the rain-blurred skyline seemed to mock him, distorting the empire his father had built and he had assumed would be his birthright to command. Crystal tumblers of 18-year-old Macallan scattered throughout the minimalist space marked the progression of his fury since returning from the Crystal Swan, amber liquid catching the subtle recessed lighting as he raised another glass to his lips, while balancing his smartphone against his ear with his shoulder. His reflection fractured across multiple surfaces of his ultramodern apartment, multiplying the image of dishevelment that had replaced his usual immaculate appearance, designer tie loosened, and dark hair rumpled from running, agitated fingers through it repeatedly while making call after call to contacts who owed him favours or feared his family name. The scent of expensive cologne mingled with alcohol and the electric tang of jealousy as he barked orders to a private investigator renowned for finding damaging information about troublesome individuals, demanding everything about Amara Johnson from parking tickets to past relationships, school records to social media accounts, promising bonuses for all particularly embarrassing discoveries that might explain her mysterious hold over his father. Each call increased in intensity as Karim recruited former classmates now working in hospital administration, finance, and city government, activating a network of privilege constructed over decades of elite schooling and social connections, all now focused laser-like on destroying the credibility of a waitress who had somehow made Faisal Al-Fayeed look at her with respect never shown to his own son. Condensation gathered on the windows as the temperature differential between heated interior luxury and cold exterior reality created a symbolic barrier between Karim-insulated life and the harsher world Amara navigated daily, droplets racing down the glass and merging like the conspiracy he was constructing against her, with each new call. His laptop glowed with multiple browser tabs devoted to background check services, social media profiles and employee records hacked from restaurant databases, digital breadcrumbs assembling into a preliminary picture of a woman working multiple jobs to support an elderly grandmother and nursing school tuition. Details that should have evoked sympathy, but instead fueled his determination to find leverage among her obvious financial vulnerabilities. The blue light of screens illuminated his face from multiple angles in the dimmed apartment as night deepened outside, casting harsh shadows that emphasized the contours of entitlement and wounded pride etched into features accustomed to deference rather than dismissal. His reflection multiplied across glossy surfaces, like the expanding network of investigators now tracking every aspect of Amara modest life, hunting for secrets that could neutralize whatever inexplicable power she wielded over Faisal Al-Fayeed, a power that had made the legendary businessman look at a waitress with recognition while rendering his son temporarily invisible. Sunlight filtered through threadbare curtains in narrow beams that illuminated swirling dust motes like miniature constellations in the small Harlem apartment where Amara and her grandmother Naima had created a home from necessity and determination. The space told stories through its careful arrangements of mismatched furniture purchased second-hand yet arranged with dignity, medical textbooks stacked beside ancient volumes of poetry, prescription bottles organized beside delicate glass perfume containers from another era and continent. The doorbell chime had sounded foreign in a place that rarely received visitors, Amara smoothing nervous hands across her jeans before opening the door to find Faisal Al-Fayeed standing in her hallway, the billionaire looking simultaneously powerful and uncertain in surroundings far removed from his usual marble-floored domains. His entrance transformed their modest living room through the alchemy of contrast, his bespoke suit and handmade shoes representing more wealth than every object in the apartment. Combined, yet his expression carried unusual humility as his eyes swept across faded photographs showing Egyptian pyramids, university buildings, and younger versions of people whose features resonated across decades. The air grew thick with unspoken history when Naima emerged from her bedroom using a walker for support, her body diminished by age and illness, yet her eyes sharp and clear as desert stars when they found Faisal standing motionless in her living room. Something ancient and profound passed between the elderly woman and the billionaire as they regarded each other across a chasm of years and circumstance, their shared gaze containing novels of unspoken information, while Amara watched in confusion from the periphery of a moment she could sense was momentous without understanding why. Colour drained from Naima weathered face before flooding back with heightened intensity, her fingers trembling against her walker, while Faisal stood perfectly still except for the subtle movement of his throat as he swallowed emotion too powerful to express in any language. Light caught on the small golden scarab pendant hanging around Naima's neck, drawing attention to the identical object suddenly visible in Faisal's palm as he withdrew it from his pocket with reverence normally reserved for holy relics, the matching artifacts capturing sunlight and transforming it into something more significant than mere reflection. Tears gathered in eyes that had witnessed revolutions and built empires as the two elders gravitated toward each other with the inevitable pull of planets returning to ordained orbits. Decades of separation collapsing into nothing beneath the weight of recognition that transcended time and circumstance. The small apartment with its water stains and creaking floors briefly transformed into sacred space through the alchemy of reunion, boundaries between worlds dissolving as Faisal Al-Fayeed, controller of billions, reached with trembling fingers toward Naima, possessor of wisdom, both their faces revealing that wealth and poverty were merely temporary conditions while some connections remained permanent and unbreakable despite all attempts to sever them through distance, time, or the artificial hierarchies of human construction. The small apartment kitchen transformed into sacred ground for revelations, as Naima settled into her worn armchair with the practiced care of someone accustomed to managing chronic pain, her fingers absently tracing the golden scarab pendant while her eyes held the distant focus of someone viewing landscapes decades removed from present reality. Steam rose from the chipped mugs of mint tea arranged on a tray before them, the aromatic vapour carrying memories of Cairo marketplaces and university libraries as Naima's voice emerged with unexpected strength, describing not the seamstress Amara had always believed her grandmother to be, but a brilliant linguist specialising in hieratic script and Demotic Egyptian at Cairo. University, words spilled forth like precious artifacts unearthed after decades of burial, detailing her groundbreaking translation work on papyrus fragments discovered near Abydos that revealed previously unknown connections between ancient Egyptian mathematical concepts and architectural innovations. Faisal sat motionless except for the subtle nodding of his head in confirmation, as Naima described her discovery of numerical sequences embedded within temple measurements that predated similar mathematical concepts by thousands of years, findings that challenged established historical narratives about the development of advanced mathematics. Sunlight shifted through the apartment windows as afternoon progressed toward evening, illuminating decades-old photographs on the walls with new significance as Amara recognized university buildings behind younger versions of her grandmother, images she had seen daily without understanding their true context. The scent of aging paper filled the room as Naima withdrew a slender journal from beneath her mattress, its leather binding cracked with age, but its pages filled with intricate diagrams and calculations in her precise handwriting, tangible evidence of the scholarly life hidden beneath decades of struggle and sacrifice. Something akin to reverence passed across Faisal features as he carefully accepted the journal handed to him, his fingers touching the pages with the careful appreciation of someone who recognized their true value beyond any monetary assessment. Colour flushed across Naima's cheeks as decades of silence transformed into articulate passion, describing how her research had been systematically appropriated by more powerful academic figures when political upheaval forced her hasty departure from Egypt, her groundbreaking discoveries published under other names while she fled with nothing but essential documents and her infant daughter. The cramped apartment seemed suddenly expansive as hidden history filled its corners, ordinary objects recontextualized as the precious remnants of an extraordinary life, family mythology crystallizing into documented reality with each photograph and letter Naima retrieved from carefully preserved boxes. Amara sat perfectly still on their second-hand sofa, her understanding of herself fundamentally shifting with each revelation as she recognized intellectual inheritance beyond the financial poverty that had shaped her childhood. Seeing her own academic determination and linguistic facility not as random traits, but as direct legacies from the brilliant scholar who had raised her while keeping painful truths carefully wrapped in silence. The golden afternoon light caught dust motes swirling through air, grown thick with implications about justice, recognition, and the ways power structures systematically obscured certain voices while amplifying others. Historical patterns suddenly personal as Amara witnessed the living embodiment of unattributed brilliance in the grandmother whose true legacy had remained hidden within plain sight throughout her entire life. The Crystal Swan hummed with Tuesday evening elegance as Amara balanced trays of seared scallops and champagne flutes, her mind still processing revelations about her grandmother, while her body performed the familiar ballet of fine dining service with practiced precision. Silverware clinked against china and soft jazz floated beneath the murmur of business negotiations and romantic conversations, creating the ambient soundtrack of luxury against which Amara had become nearly invisible through professional competence. The atmospheric pressure inside the restaurant shifted perceptibly when Karim Al-Fayeed entered without his usual entourage, his designer suit impeccable but his eyes burning with vindictive triumph as he scanned the dining room before locking onto Amara with predatory focus. Light glinted off the leather portfolio clutched in his manicured hands as he strode directly toward her, ignoring the hostess attempting to intercept him, his movement creating ripples of attention throughout the restaurant as diners sensed imminent drama. Cold sweat gathered between Amara's shoulder blades as Karim approached with purpose that radiated dangerous intent, her tray suddenly heavy against her arm as instinct urged retreat while professional obligation anchored her in place. The air between them charged with hostile energy as he reached her station, his voice pitched to carry beyond their immediate vicinity as he proclaimed discoveries about her criminal grandmother, who had stolen research and fled Egypt in disgrace, brandishing photocopied documents with highlighted sections allegedly proving Naima had plagiarized the work of respected scholars. Crystal glasses stilled against lips throughout the dining room as conversations halted mid-sentence, wealthy patrons turning toward the spectacle with expressions ranging from discomfort to fascination, the restaurant transforming into theatre with Amara unwillingly cast in the starring role. Heat blazed across her cheeks as public humiliation burned through her professional composure, multiple futures collapsing before her eyes as she recognized the power of accusation regardless of truth, understanding how easily Karim narrative could destroy her nursing school prospects, her employment opportunities, and her grandmother already fragile health if stress from public disgrace exacerbated her condition. The weight of generations pressed upon Amara's shoulders as she recognized this moment as a crucible, where her response would either validate or refute everything her grandmother had endured, her mind racing through possible reactions while her body remained perfectly still except for the subtle trembling of fingers against her serving tray. Restaurant staff hovered uncertainly at the periphery, management clearly reluctant to intervene against the Al-Fayeed heir, despite the disruption to dining atmosphere their inaction revealing how privilege afforded immunity from rules governing ordinary behavior in spaces designed to maintain strict social hierarchies. Light from overhead chandeliers seemed to intensify into spotlight precision as Karim continued his accusations with increasing volume, patrons watching with the particular fascination humans reserve for witnessing private catastrophes in public spaces, Amara standing at the center of unwanted attention, while understanding with perfect clarity that this moment represented more than personal humiliation, but a test of her capacity to defend truth against power when every institutional advantage belonged to her accuser. The leather interior of Faisal Al-Fayeed Bentley Mulsanne enveloped Amara in the scent of luxury and privilege as they sat parked overlooking the Hudson River, city lights reflecting off dark water while silence gathered between them, with the density of approaching thunder. Raindrops created percussive patterns against the bulletproof glass, forming liquid barriers between their conversation and the outside world, as Faisal stared straight ahead with hands gripping the steering wheel. Though the engine remained silent, his knuckles whitening with each passing moment, before words finally emerged in a voice she barely recognized for its naked vulnerability. The confession spilled forth in carefully constructed sentences that nonetheless carried the raw power of decades of suppressed truth, detailing how he had systematically appropriated Naima groundbreaking research on mathematical patterns found in ancient Egyptian architecture, using her discoveries about structural principles to revolutionize his family construction business and eventually build the Al-Fayeed empire spanning 5 continents. His voice caught on descriptions of their early collaboration at Cairo University, how her brilliant insights about load-bearing calculations derived from temple measurements had initially inspired genuine admiration before transforming into dangerous temptation when political upheaval created opportunity for appropriation without consequence. Moonlight filtered through rain-streaked windows, casting shadow patterns across his weathered face that emphasized the lines carved by success built upon someone else's foundation, his eyes reflecting decades of compartmentalized guilt now breaking free into conscious acknowledgement. The plush interior of the vehicle, designed for ultimate comfort, suddenly seemed airless and confining as historical injustice filled the limited space between them. The car itself representing wealth accumulated through actions Faisal was now naming with unflinching precision. Each luxury feature surrounding them transformed into physical evidence of intellectual theft. Heat from the perfectly regulated climate system pressed against Amara's skin as implications cascaded through her consciousness, recognizing that her grandmother years of struggle, her own educational sacrifices, their shared financial hardships all existed in direct relationship to the billions accumulated by the man now confessing his foundational sin with trembling voice. Night pressed against the windows as Faisal continued with mounting urgency, describing how initial rationalization had calcified into defensive self-justification over decades, how he had tracked Naima from a distance while never finding courage to make amends, how seeing Amara had crystallized his understanding that consequences of his actions extended through generations. The moral complexity of the situation expanded with each revelation, as Amara recognized that simple answers about right and wrong offered no clear path forward, that pursuing complete justice might require destroying institutions employing thousands, that forgiveness without restitution perpetuated injustice, that any public revelation would irreparably alter her grandmother's final years through stress and publicity. Leather creaked beneath Amara's clenched fingers as she absorbed revelations that transformed not just her understanding of the past, but the shape of all possible futures, recognizing that any response would require choosing between competing values of justice, privacy, practicality, and familial protection. Moral clarity suddenly clouded by the reality that human actions create consequences too complex for simple resolution, regardless of how clearly wrong the original sin might appear. Fluorescent lighting cast an unforgiving pallor across the hospital room where Naima lay, connected to monitoring equipment, the rhythmic beeping of heart rate sensors providing clinical counterpoint to the laboured sound of her breathing beneath an oxygen mask. The antiseptic environment with its vinyl floors and laminated surfaces created stark contrast to the worn comfort of their apartment. The institutional efficiency of modern medicine replacing the accumulated history of personal spaces, time compressed into the urgent present tense of crisis that allowed no luxury of gradual resolution. Amara had not left the hospital for 36 hours, sleeping upright in a molded plastic chair positioned beside the bed, her nursing textbooks abandoned in a corner while she divided attention between her grandmother, pale face, and the mounting paperwork detailing procedures, medications, and escalating costs not fully covered by their limited insurance. The scent of industrial disinfectant filled her nostrils with each anxious breath as doctors discussed pulmonary complications and cardiac concerns, medical terminology familiar from her studies now terrifying when applied to the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise her. Harsh overhead lighting illuminated the stack of forms requiring immediate attention, preliminary billing statements with astronomical figures that blurred before her exhausted eyes, each page representing another impossible mountain to climb, while her grandmother's respiratory function remained the immediate priority demanding all available emotional resources. Text messages from her supervisor at the Crystal Swan grew increasingly insistent about her return date. Subtle warnings about replacement that created additional pressure layered atop overwhelming worry about Naima condition and the knowledge that each missed shift represented income they desperately needed, yet could not prioritize above hospital vigilance. The bitter taste of vending machine coffee lingered on her tongue as she calculated and recalculated impossible financial equations, her phone screen displaying a checking account balance insufficient for even the initial hospital admission costs, savings depleted by previous medical expenses and tuition payments. Sunlight streamed through half-closed blinds, creating barcode patterns across the institutional bedding that somehow emphasized the commodification of health and vulnerability in systems designed for profit rather than compassion. The sterile environment throwing into sharp relief how quickly circumstances could transform from difficult yet manageable to catastrophic and overwhelming. The cold plastic chair beneath her ached against her spine as Amara confronted impossible choices between pursuing historical justice that might eventually provide restitution and accepting immediate financial assistance from the very source of generational injustice, principles of right and wrong suddenly complicated by tubes delivering oxygen to struggling lungs and monitors tracking fragile heartbeats. Her phone screen illuminated with an incoming message from Faisal, offering to cover all medical expenses without conditions or expectations. The blue light reflecting in her eyes as she stared at words representing both salvation and compromise, immediate relief and potential betrayal of everything her grandmother had silently endured for decades. The moral complexity of real-world choices crushing abstract ideals beneath the weight of present necessity and love that prioritize survival above all philosophical considerations regarding justice, accountability, and the price of forgiveness. Floor-to-ceiling windows transformed Manhattan into a miniature empire visible from the 62nd floor of Al-Fayeed Industries headquarters. The corporate throne room where Karim had always felt most powerful now feeling cavernous and strangely empty despite its museum-quality art and custom furnishings selected by the world-renowned designers. Sunlight struck the glass and steel surfaces with scientific precision, creating prismatic effects that would normally delight him but now seemed like shallow distractions as he paced across marble, imported from quarries his family owned. His reflection multiplied and distorted across polished surfaces that suddenly felt like physical manifestations of the moral distortion supporting their entire financial kingdom. The leather folder containing his father confession lay open on his desk, detailed. Documentation of how their architectural innovations, patented building techniques, and groundbreaking materials all originated from research stolen from Naima decades ago, each page revealing another layer of his identity as illusory, another foundation stone of his existence as fraudulent. Coffee cooled untouched in a handcrafted porcelain cup as Karim stared at financial reports with newly critical eyes, seeing beyond impressive growth projections and market dominance to recognize the human cost of empire built through intellectual theft, his mind calculating different metrics than quarterly profits for the first time in his privileged existence. The familiar weight of his custom watch felt suddenly burdensome against his wrist, the metal and jewels representing hours of Naima unpaid intellectual labor, years of struggle for Amara, generations of recognized brilliance, systematically erased and reattributed to maintain the fiction of meritocratic success his family narrative had always emphasized. Rain began falling against the panoramic windows, distorting the view of properties bearing the Al-Fayeed name across the cityscape, each droplet creating ripple effects that mirrored the expanding consequences of original sin, now impossible to ignore or compartmentalize through the comfortable self-deception that had previously protected his conscience from inconvenient truths. The subtle vibration of his phone against the desk announced another call from lawyers charged with protecting family interests, their messages increasingly urgent as rumors circulated through financial circles about irregularities in the company foundation, metaphorical tremors threatening the literal architectural achievements built upon appropriated knowledge. Cold air circulated through hidden vents with perfect efficiency as Karim faced the hollow core of everything he had valued. Recognition dawning that his designer clothes, exotic cars, and model girlfriends constituted elaborate distractions from the spiritual poverty at the center of material abundance. Each luxury item suddenly transformed from status symbol to evidence of moral compromise. The weight of generations pressed upon his shoulders as he recognized his position at the fulcrum of potential redemption or continued corruption. The opportunity to rectify historical injustice balanced against the seductive pull of maintaining privileged existence. His identity crisis representing in microcosm the larger ethical questions facing societies built upon unacknowledged exploitation and systematic erasure of marginalized contributions regardless of their fundamental importance to collective achievement. The expansive office with its carefully curated displays of success felt increasingly claustrophobic as Karim confronted the reality that genuine integrity might require sacrificing everything he had previously valued, that moral redemption might cost precisely what he had always used to measure his worth. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows of the Al-Fayeed Industries boardroom, illuminating the 60-foot mahogany table where 20 board members in bespoke suits shifted uncomfortably on the Italian leather chairs, their collective wealth and power temporarily immobilized by confusion as Faisal Al-Fayeed remained standing at the head position, typically reserved for confident pronouncements about quarterly profits and market expansion. The polished surface reflected distorted versions of concerned expressions as tension filled the rarefied air, the familiar scent of success temporarily displaced by the unfamiliar aroma of accountability, as Faisal distributed leather portfolios containing documents none had anticipated reviewing during the routine quarterly meeting. Crystal water glasses trembled slightly against coasters embossed with the company logo as board members absorbed photographs of a younger Naima beside research papers bearing her name, mathematical formulas underlying their architectural patents, original notebooks containing calculations that had transformed construction possibilities worldwide and subsequently generated billions across multiple markets. The Manhattan skyline visible through panoramic windows seemed to waver slightly in the distance as Faisal's voice filled the hushed space with unwavering clarity, publicly acknowledging that the revolutionary architectural principles upon which their entire corporate empire rested originated not from his own genius as company mythology had always claimed, but from the brilliant research of Amara Johnson, whose intellectual property had been systematically appropriated without attribution or compensation during political upheaval decades earlier. Expensive pens clattered against notepapers as board members exchanged alarmed glances, legal counsel typing furiously on tablets, while financial officers ran rapid calculations of potential liability, the atmospheric pressure inside the room shifting with each revelation about historical injustice now being dragged into harsh light after decades of comfortable darkness. The familiar boardroom with its awards and accolades displayed in illuminated cases along the perimeter walls transformed into courtroom and confessional simultaneously as Faisal announced structural changes to company ownership, establishing Naima and her granddaughter Amara as majority shareholders with immediate effect, restructuring the corporation to include research fellowships for underrepresented scholars, and creating a foundation specifically addressing intellectual property protection for vulnerable academics during political instability. Colour drained from faces accustomed to controlling narratives rather than rewriting them as Faisal continued with calm determination, explaining that justice delayed was preferable to justice denied, that moral redemption required more than private apology, that genuine integrity demanded public accountability, regardless of personal cost or market consequences. Light refracted through crystal water pitchers, casting rainbow patterns across financial documents now being fundamentally recontextualized through ethical considerations previously absent from calculations of value, success, and legitimate acquisition of intellectual property. The boardroom with its symbolic trappings of power became momentarily sacred through the alchemical transformation of confession and restitution, the polished table that had witnessed countless decisions based exclusively on profit margins now supporting documents that prioritized human dignity and historical accuracy above market valuation, creating physical manifestation of justice long delayed, but finally served through recognition that true wealth required moral foundations stronger than marble and more transparent than glass. Sunlight filtered through stained glass windows of the university auditorium, casting jewel-toned patterns across rows of nursing graduates in crisp white uniforms and blue caps, Amara Johnson among them, with shoulders squared beneath academic regalia that represented not merely educational achievement but the culmination of a journey spanning generations. The scent of fresh flowers and perfume mingled in the air as she accepted her diploma with steady hands, her gaze finding the unlikely assemblage of supporters in the third row, where Naima sat in a wheelchair, but with colour returned to her cheeks, oxygen tank temporarily unnecessary in the excitement of witnessing her granddaughter achievement, seated beside Faisal Al-Fayeed, whose weathered face reflected genuine pride rather than obligation. Camera flashes captured the moment for posterity as Amara moved her tassel from right to left, the simple gesture representing complex transformation from server to healthcare provider, from economic vulnerability to financial security, from historical footnote to recognized contributor in the foundation now reshaping opportunities for academic researchers across continents. The marble lobby outside filled with celebration after the ceremony, champagne flutes raised in congratulatory toasts as Karim approached with uncharacteristic humility, his designer suit still impeccable, but his demeanor fundamentally altered by months working alongside Amara to implement scholarship programs for promising students from underrepresented backgrounds. His understanding of value systems recalibrated through witnessing how justice created possibilities rather than limitations. Golden afternoon light streamed through arched windows as representatives from hospitals recruited by the newly established Johnson Al-Fayeed Foundation discussed rural healthcare initiatives with recent graduates, the space humming with potential energy as intellectual property lawyers finalized attribution protocols ensuring future researchers would receive proper credit regardless of political circumstances or power differentials. The sweet perfume of success permeated the air as Naima received recognition from the university president for her groundbreaking work now properly attributed through academic journals and architectural textbooks, her lifetime of unacknowledged brilliance finally receiving institutional validation while creating pathways for others facing similar obstacles. Crystal glasses clinked in celebration as a former restaurant staff now employed by the foundation circulated with trays of refreshments, economic ecosystems restructured to value service through living wages rather than precarious dependence on tips, the material transformation reflecting deeper ethical recalibration, prioritizing human dignity above profit margins. Amara nursing Pin caught sunlight as she moved through the crowd with professional confidence, her medical knowledge complementing rather than replacing her service experience. Both skill sets now valued equally in her role, developing healthcare access programs for communities traditionally excluded from quality treatment options, her personal journey from surviving to thriving, mirroring larger systemic transformations occurring through structures designed for equity rather than exploitation. The graduation ceremony with its ritualized acknowledgement of achievements symbolized not merely individual success, but collective possibility when justice received proper prioritization, when historical wrongs faced correction rather than continuation, when moral courage overcame material temptation, creating ripple effects extending far beyond immediate participants to touch countless lives through institutional change grounded in recognition of human worth, transcending artificial hierarchies of value. Morning sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows of the Johnson Al-Fayeed Foundation headquarters, illuminating dust motes dancing above stacks of research papers where Karim and Amara huddled over historical documents with shared purpose that would have seemed impossible months earlier. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with old paper and possibility as they reviewed applications from overlooked researchers whose work deserved recognition, their collaborative efforts transforming the sleek office into sacred space where past injustices found remedy through present action. The man who once mocked accents now listened with genuine interest as scholars from diverse backgrounds described innovations in virtual meetings displayed on wall-mounted screens, his designer suit replaced by casual attire that emphasized substance over status, his expressions revealing authentic engagement rather than performed interest. Golden light caught the edge of framed photographs showing Naima receiving long-delayed academic honors beside architectural diagrams now properly attributed in textbooks worldwide, visible reminders of transformation possible when accountability replaced evasion and moral courage overcame material temptation. Karim fingers. Karim traced names on grant proposals with reverence previously reserved for luxury purchases, his understanding of value fundamentally recalibrated through witnessing how recognition created flourishing rather than scarcity, how justice generated possibilities that transcended zero-sum thinking that had previously limited his imagination regarding wealth distribution. Plants thrived in corners of the sunlit space, their vibrant green contrasting with polished surfaces that reflected two people whose paths had collided through circumstances neither could have predicted, their unlikely alliance creating ripple effects extending far beyond immediate beneficiaries to touch countless lives through institutional changes, reshaping opportunity landscapes across continents. The subtle aroma of cinnamon from shared pastries lingered as they finalized selection of 10 previously unknown scholars whose research would receive funding, publication support, and integration into prestigious university curricula, small acts of correction creating expansive consequences through generational impact on knowledge ecosystem. Laughter occasionally punctuated serious discussions, genuine connection replacing artificial hierarchy as Karim absorbed Amara practical wisdom regarding lived experiences of marginalized contributors, her insights informing structural changes that addressed root causes rather than symptoms of inequitable attribution. Computer screens displayed testimonials from previous grant recipients whose careers had blossomed through proper acknowledgement, their success stories creating roadmaps for others facing similar obstacles while demonstrating how systems could evolve when foundational assumptions regarding merit underwent critical examination. The weight of history remained present, yet no longer crushing as they worked within the tension between acknowledging past wrongs while creating future possibilities, their collaborative efforts embodying reconciliation that transcended simplistic narratives about villains and victims to recognize how moral awakening could transform even those who had benefited from unjust systems into advocates for their dismantling. Sunlight shifted across the polished conference table where coffee cups sat beside water glasses, ordinary objects elevated through extraordinary purpose as two people from worlds previously separated by artificial barriers demonstrated how courage, accountability, and genuine human connection could bridge even the widest divides when truth received proper prioritization over comfort and justice over convenience.